Hi, thanks for watching. I've been seeing a lot of really cool recipes, brew recipes online, and I really enjoy the fact that people test them. But then something starts worrying me because if you see a brew recipe online and you don't have the coffee that the person has used to perfect that recipe with, and you're brewing something with a different coffee, then how will you get the same result? So I want to share today something that's been on my mind for a while, because if you see a really cool brew recipe online and you try to copy the exact same recipe, that does not give you a guaranteed great cup of coffee, which can be frustrating. So I kind of want to give you a couple of tricks to adapt that cool recipe that you saw online and kind of adapt it to whatever your coffee you're brewing with that day. Alright, so let's get started. That recipe uses 16 grams of coffee, 230 grams of water, and is based on an inverted Aeropress brew. Now it is very basic and it is the first starting point for me when I brew my Aeropress. But suppose I have a new coffee that I want to try and I haven't tasted it before. I make that recipe and then I go from there. So let's start with brewing my go-to Aeropress recipe, which you can find on my website, and taste it for a new coffee. And I will walk you through the steps that I take after I've made that go-to recipe, just to see how you can adapt a coffee after you've tried an online brew recipe. Okay, so I made a cup of coffee. I used 16 grams of medium fine coffee. I let it steep for 1 minute. I stirred it for 5 times. I did the full go-to Aeropress recipe thing. And it's okay, but I feel like I can do better. Now, what are my options? What can I do to actually improve this okay cup of coffee? It's lacking some brightness, something to make it vibrant. This is just straight up decent cup of coffee, but I feel like I can do better. And what are my options to improve it? Now, the first big influence to improve an Aeropress recipe, or any kind of brew recipe really, is the grind size, because it's really hard to see what grind size people are using from an online brew recipe. It usually says like medium or coarse, or now because in this cup of coffee I'm tasting some dryness, a little bit, it's not really bitter, that might be a bigger word, but it's a little bit dryish and unpleasant in the finish. And if I wanted to choose the option of changing grind size, I would in this case go slightly coarser. Now the way you go finer and coarser is different for every grinder. In the case of a hand grinder, it's usually adapting the amount of turns. So if I wanted to improve this cup of coffee because I want to add more acidity to it and to kind of get rid of that slightly dryish aftertaste, not really bitter, but hinting towards that, I would have the option of grinding a little bit coarser. I'll extract less from the coffee grinds and I will get some higher acidity. The second option I have to improve my Aeropress brew is to play around with the temperature that I brewed with. Now this cup of coffee I brewed with 94 degrees Celsius. If I want to increase the acidity, I could try brewing with a lower temperature, because that will increase the acidity and lower the dryness, the bitterness that I'm experiencing. The higher you brew, the higher temperature you use while brewing, the more you will extract. So the more coffee flavor you will get in your coffee. So that usually also means more sweetness, but that's also the risk of getting that bitterness. So if you want to get more acidity in your cup, try to brew with a little bit lower temperature. The other way to influence my brew is to change the time that I'm brewing. So in my go-to recipe, I'm letting it steep for 1 minute. And if I want to increase the acidity of my cup and to lower the bitterness, I could choose to brew shorter. This will also decrease the extraction, which will help bring out some more acidity. So for instance, I could, instead of flipping it and pressing it after 1 minute, try to flip and press after 45 seconds. Another factor that can really improve your brew is to think about the amount of agitation that you use. And agitation is just a really nice word to say how much you've moved the coffee grinds. If you stir the coffee grinds more, if you create more turbulence, then you will create more extraction. And again, the more extraction, the more bitterness and dryness you will get in your cup. So if in my case I would want to decrease that amount of dryness and bitterness, I would be able to, instead of stirring 5 times, try a more gentle swirl, or just give it 1 stir. Just agitate the coffee less to extract a little bit less. Another really good way to improve your extraction and to improve your brew is to play around with the dose, the amount of coffee that you're using. So for my go-to recipe, I start out with 16 grams, but maybe if I go a little bit higher in dose, then I would bring up the body, the acidity, the brightness, and the complexity. That might really help to improve it as well. So try to increase your dose to increase the acidity, and try to lower your dose to kind of balance out acidity if there's too much in it. And of course that depends on the coffee that you're brewing. If you have a coffee that is generally already low in acidity, then dosing high would be my way to go. But if it's really high in acidity, then I would probably go for a slightly lower dose to kind of balance that out. Another option that you can experiment with to improve your brew recipe is to consider the bloom. For my go-to recipe, I don't make use of a bloom phase, but this is something you can play around with. In my experience, having a bloom phase for an immersion method like the Aeropress is not really necessary, but it can make a huge difference for a pour-over recipe. The bloom phase is actually where you add just a tiny bit of hot water to the dry coffee grounds, which causes the carbon dioxide that is trapped in the coffee, in the ground coffee, to escape. That means that the water can reach the coffee more evenly, which will improve your extraction, and therefore hopefully also improve the flavor of your cup. I strongly advise you to not stick to one other person's recipe. So experiment and try to rely on what you prefer. Don't assume that because someone told you this is what works for them, that necessarily has to work for you as well, because in the end it's about how you like to drink your cup of coffee. So don't be too scared to play around and just use these 6 factors to test something out and to see if that recipe that you're trying can actually be adapted to the coffee that you're having at that moment. And the next day, when the coffee is a little bit older, or you're trying a different coffee, experiment again and again until you are so comfortable with using these parameters that you will get a great tasting cup of coffee every single time. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope you took something from it, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon. If you like this video, it would help me a lot if you gave it a like or share it. If you have any comments, I'm more than happy to hear them, and I look forward to staying in touch.